So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Rosen. I've been doing this line of work of like the metaphysical variety, like astrology, human design, shamanism, started in 2018, and it's a long ways away from being a construction project manager, I'll tell you that much. It's definitely been a big new world, but as challenging as it's been at times, because I'm sure you've all experienced this at times, you know, it's like the spiritual circuit and learning about yourself and chakras and healing and all this stuff. It's not always all sunshine and rainbows. You know, there's a shadow work element to it, right? There's this dark night of the soul stuff. There's constrictions that happen, you know, life changes, challenges in relationships, family situations, you know, conflicting belief systems. How does being spiritual fit into the world right now as it's going through what it's going through, right? So I was really feeling the calling to kind of like shift gears. Like usually when I do these lectures, like I'm just doing more basic astrology stuff. I'm just like talking about the astrology that's ahead, or just like helping people on a personal level with their astrology. But I wanted to talk about not just the intersection of the astrology that's coming, but also kind of like a sister modality that's called human design, that is demonstrating a really big shift that's happening in February of 2027. This is the type of significance that is pretty unprecedented, because we've been going through a 413-year cycle. We're wrapping up on February 2027, which in human design is known as the right angle cross of planning. So what that means is that we don't know what it's like to not live in a world where everything is built on external structures and planning and systems and governments and, you know, insurance companies and financial institutions and all of that. And so as that cycle's ending and a new cycle begins is what the topic of today is, which is the rise of the sleeping phoenix. And so what this new cycle that we're going to be in for the rest of our lives for sure is really about personal sovereignty, like self-leadership, how to access like your own intuition, how to live out and embody like your own personal human design blueprint and your astrology, and just all the things that, you know, I encourage everyone to double down on and learn about, but to take it from like the conceptual thought form level to like, you know, living and breathing it, because it kind of brings up this idea of God's providence or creator, you know, if you want to use that. I know God can be a buzzword for some people, but this idea of like, well, how do I walk through a world that if it's going to be in transition, there's going to be like stuff happening out here, and it's like we're not in Kansas anymore. I didn't even have that prepared. It just came out. And so it's like this personal sovereignty of like being kind of like divinely protected, because we're trusting a deeper innate intuitive sense in ourselves that is defined within us to kind of not only lead us to surviving, you know, at a baseline, because this ending of this old era and this new one, it will bring up some basic bare bones stuff of survival, you know. There are going to be some systems that kind of come down. I know a lot of people talk about disclosure, you know, like, hey, what's really going on with the government and certain programs and stuff like that. So I think there'll definitely be a lot of that too. But like on the personal front, we're really ending this external system authoritarian cycle of like, hey, tell me what's going on, which I think we all learned in 2020 we couldn't trust that anyway, right? So this becomes like self-sourced energy, to the point even where like I'm trying to even conceptualize it, you know, what does that even mean for whether it's like the life coaching industry or, you know, astrologers or just in general. And I think what it's meant to be is that the arrow has to be pointed back to the individual, like how to like kind of like help them become their own sovereign authority to sort of like lead their life, because this is the type of thing where it's weird, because I think there's a part of us, and probably most people in this room, it's like we see that there's a change that needs to happen, but it's almost like the mess of things ending, and then Earth like the world being in a reconstruction zone a little bit. Like even if you just take how in astrology Saturn, Neptune coming together at the early degrees of Aries, like every time that happens in history, the world's always in a reconstruction zone. And it's like this combination of, wow, Saturn, this is very real, this is the reality, then Neptune, the fog of like, what the hell is going on here? But like accessing that intuition, like for that integrity of Saturn that's personal in Aries to go, okay, like this is the direction that I'm being led. And because that right angle cross of planning is ending, that means the whole mapping life out 6 months ahead, that kind of goes bye-bye. It's moment to moment after that. So talk about like, you know, some people maybe being probably in a lot of fear, chaos, right? Uncertainty, which it's like, there's a lot of that now already, but it really kind of thrusts it into the limelight. So I think the person that's going to be the new type of like leader is the one that is like the role model, like that they are self-sourced with their energy, they are self-trusting, they do kind of like operate in the rhythm of life, and their central nervous system is more balanced, because, you know, anxiety, fear, that's all contagious, but so is like higher states, higher vibrations, you know, like joy and play and things like that. And it might be hard to find, you know, that it might be like catching lightning in the bottle a little bit, because I mean, I think there's going to be a really serious like nature to this stuff that's coming, but I think it is the spiritual folk that know how to kind of embody this, and that it's not even like the big marquee thing, like look at me, I'm the big spiritual guru in my Instagram following or anything like that. It's more just like when it comes to relationships, tribe, and it'll be interesting to talk about how this impacts family situations, but I think it's going to be more frequency based. Like we're going to see it more and more and more that like attracts like, and so what we've mostly been basing our tribes and communities on is like, hey, does your belief system match my belief system, right? Do we like think the same way? So frequency is a little bit different, because, you know, the mind can have its like theories and beliefs in that, but the mind's also a trickster, right? And so it doesn't always mean that the belief, the story is true. Ask me how I know. I had to go down those shamanic rabbit holes, especially recently. And so it's like this understanding that if we can elevate our frequency, which it's kind of just like tuning a radio station dial a little bit, and I would encourage everyone to check it out. Dr. David Hawkins wrote a couple of books. I think one's called like The Pathway to Surrender or something like that. Power versus Force is definitely the other one, but he kind of like mapped out this like frequency scale of consciousness, and so it's a good template to kind of like look at. I think it's good for being like, okay, where am I at right now? Oh, okay, I'm in courage right now. Okay, well, what's the next step up, you know, above courage, and seeing like if you can go into those higher states. This is all very much moving from the way that we've traditionally operated through the mind, through the way it likes to see and perceive things and puzzle things together and create systems. And, you know, the mind wants the comfort of preferring not to have an unknown, which that's very much what's coming, to kind of like plan and do things in the future. And with the human design piece of it, it becomes a little bit more like intuitive solar plexus led. If you've heard this idea that we have like a second brain like in the gut, because there's like so many nerve endings and so much of our immune system here, but like some of this study, like you can even argue like this was meant to be the first brain, you know, that this was meant to just be neutral, just like taking in information, not just like judging or criticizing or labeling or like assigning all these meanings that can get us into trouble. And so it's more body led, right? And so it's this idea of like, yes, spirit, you know, the ether, the angels, all that stuff's up here as forms of consciousness. But when you bridge this human piece of like survival, human design, or sovereignty, that sort of thing. It's kind of like, how do you connect the soul or the spirit like in through the body? And so a lot of that's going to be more of the embodiment, like whether you want to describe it like through the chakra centers or what have you. But it's like the mind, again, it can believe one thing, but it's sort of like checking in here and being like, well, how do I feel about this situation? And so what'll be really interesting too is things start to become more solar plexus led, and because this is such an emotional intuitive center, and we actually have some really wide auric fields, and I think they're just either going to get wider or we're just going to start to sense more. So it's like, if there's people 9 yards away from you that like are in panic and feel like the Chicken Littles of the world, you know, then like that will be felt, right? And so then it kind of brings up, again, the discernment of frequency and like how to like weave through the world around being around that. And so this whole notion of like I saw it come up especially in 2020, 2021. It was like the world was going through all this stuff, and there was some people that was like, I'm out of here, I'm going to get an RV, I'm going to go travel, and I'm just done with this stuff. It was very South and Sagittarius. And so, but it's like now it's going to be like, there's nowhere to kind of go, you know, like to like avoid it completely. And so it's not that there's not going to be like oasis places, there will definitely be that, but it's kind of like I think the important piece is that more Aries empowered like personal sovereignty of like, okay, like I'm feeling called to go in this direction to do this next step. I call it being like a spiritual MacGyver, if anyone remembers that show. Like you always like had the thing in the moment to like get him out of the situation. And so it's like doing that intuitively. It's like, well, if I feel called to go over here, you know, I gotta go there. Like the image that's like coming to mind was like, I don't know if anyone watched The Walking Dead, but it would be like Rick like having to like go into Atlanta like around all the zombies to like find something, you know. So I definitely don't want to like throw shade or negativity to like people, you know, that aren't like really fully prepared and ready for this stuff. I mean, maybe that's, some people just need that like loud sonic boom alarm to kind of go off a little bit. But I think as much as there's this Aries like survival component to it, I definitely don't think that the feminine component of it that we've been kind of like learning through the spiritual circuit of, especially since 2011 of Neptune and Pisces, because it's going to retrograde back there, just stay there for a little bit longer, that it's still like a compassionate, empathetic piece to it. It's kind of like this masculine feminine balance of like doing what needs to be done, but like still trying to maintain some sort of softness and empathy and that kind of like space holding concept. Because again, I think there's this leadership flip that's like coming where people, if they want to feel better, are gonna like gravitate towards the person that seems like they're not holding it together from like an illusionary, inauthentic standpoint, but more so like you can feel their demeanor, so to speak, and that those people are gonna be like, okay, whatever, like you said the shot was BS and I didn't listen, and now this is happening, and now there is no one out here to trust. And so like, tell me, like, can you help me? Sure, yeah, let's talk about this, let's figure this out, you know. So there's a part of me that's sort of reluctant to make like exact predictions of like how does it all like look out there, but I will say that based upon the astrology and just things like that, I'll just start with the craziest one. I wouldn't be surprised if like what we thought was just like shitty human beings like running certain parts of governments and different parts of the world are just like literally just like foreign entities, like actual like negative ETs, like, because it's Pluto and Aquarius, like the disclosures that come with Pluto and Aquarius, it deals with society, humanity, like what is the truth around like true freedom and like connection and things like that. and just like groups of people that try to like hold things down and suppress. But Aquarius is that sign that does like rule like out of this world, like alien, like ET stuff. So I think that's a part of it. We'll see Chiron go into Taurus, which deals with currency, which deals with money. We'll start to see that starting in 2027, but it'll be more permanent in 2028. So there's going to be some weird wound thing around money, currency, probably, you know, the things that we value. It could be beauty, self-worth stuff on a deeper, more intrinsic level. To put this in perspective, Chiron, it's an asteroid. It's been in Aries since 2019. And so if you notice, before 2019, no one was really talking about what happened to men or the masculine, or what's up with this masculine wound, or why, you know, some people are like, why are women more in their masculine, that sort of thing. It's just a Chiron and Aries thing. It's a collective healing thing that's been happening. And so if you just even look at it, not even from just like the gender or masculine feminine energy perspective, just the Aries identity piece, it's kind of like that, gosh, I'm trying to like be my best self, but like there's just some like weird wound and just something that's like not right. It's like no matter what we do, it's like, gosh, it's that pimple that just like won't go away, or that thing that we feel about ourselves that we just kind of had to like learn to cope with. Because Chiron's like, it's that wounded healer. It's like it learns to walk with the limp, basically. It's like, it's very human element. There's a whole mythology behind that. But so the part with Chiron and Taurus, it's kind of like, if you want to look to like external, like world stuff, you know, of course I mentioned the government part, you know, like what's really going on there, like who's really running the show, what are these things that we've been like kind of like going like, why are they doing this? I think a lot of that. But then from the financial institution perspective, it's like Chiron and Aries, it's like something's gonna look really weird around money. So it's like, you know, some people have been predicting that for a while, of like a financial collapse or something. I mean, the reason I say that like there's a reluctance like to it is because there's the planet and the sign that deal with uncertainty. Just like, it's like, oh, you think you're gonna get like the fastball, and then the pitcher throws like the curveball or the changeup. That's the planet Uranus, and it's Aquarius. So Pluto's in Aquarius, it's a revealer. So it's like the moment we are like so certain it's gonna be exactly like this is gonna be the truth, this is gonna be the reveal. It's like, haha, nope, it was actually this. It's always the thing that no one was like thinking about, you know, or at least, because it's Aquarius, it's the mass population. The greater whole or groups of people weren't thinking about. Like maybe a few people could be thinking or talking about that, but it's not really making a dent in the collective consciousness, like hive mind thinking. And then Uranus, it's not fully solidified in Gemini, but it'll be there for about 7 years. So Gemini deals with like the facts and trying to like predict, is it heads or tails, like two sides of the coin. And so then Uranus is like, well, okay, you would expect if you flipped it 10 times, maybe it'll be 5 and 5 each, and then it's never that. You know, it's like the facts, the data just doesn't like add up fully. So it can create a lot of mental confusion, because if we can't predict these things on these air sign levels of Aquarius and Gemini, it kind of just like doubles down in this more spiritual quantum way of like using the mind. That's not the way that we're like used to using it, that we have to kind of find a different way to kind of like take in the world from like more of a spiritual perspective. Like Pluto and Aquarius is like, it's too intense to try to like connect all the dots. It would be like being a drunk mad scientist, like if Doc Brown, like, I don't know, got on heroin or something, just like trying to like figure everything out, like figure out time travel and timelines and stuff like that. Pluto and Aquarius is just like where it just like clicks. It's just a light bulb moment. It's just like, oh, I got it. Like all of a sudden all this stuff connects. And then there's kind of a similar thing with the Uranus and Gemini part 2, of just like, oh, wow, I was just kind of like curiously going and doing my spiritual intuitive Saber and MacGyver thing, and here's the people I ended up with. You know, I'm just in this room, in this environment, and somehow it just like works out. So, you know, it's kind of weird because it makes me think of like, yeah, Pluto in Aquarius is like revealing of like what have been like the hidden technologies too. Like there's been a lot of tech that's been hidden for a long time. So there's like a major monkey wrench in that. I do think that, because I did a little bit of like prophecy work back in 2020. I didn't share with anyone because it was still so new, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna do prophecy work, what's up? And they're like, hey, there's gonna be a fertility crisis by 2050. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready to share that. And then the fertility rates like have been kind of declining, and so I'm like, oh shit. But like they're asking me to do it again, and so I haven't done it fully yet because the Charlie Kirk thing came up, and it's like, well fuck, I gotta talk about that because that's where everyone's attention's going. But they're telling me there's something definitely around the medical industry that's like coming too. It's like medical industry, insurance companies, that sort of thing. So my hope is that part of the whole technology thing too is us like gravitating more towards like more sophisticated ways of like healing that's not this like bunk Western medicine stuff that we do like to address all the symptoms. I mean, there's been some value there. I don't want to throw the baby out in the bathwater. You know, emergency rooms are great, you know, bad stuff happens, but it's like, you know, we don't need it for everything. So, let's see what else I want to cover here. Nothing's coming to mind. I think, I did mention that I wanted to cover the family part. You know, I think we'll probably be working out some of our greatest karma and healing probably through the family front, because if you consider this idea of a return of personal freedom and sovereignty and frequency, but then for those that continue to, you know, want to live out that kind of like more traditional family dwelling modern way of living, that will really like kind of put it in the face, like the friction, the problems, you know, where there's not true allowing and sovereignty, and this even includes like for the kids too. These first few years of Uranus and Gemini, one of the most beautiful ways to use that energy of the mind is like, and I know I'll give you a challenge, but it's kind of like being worry-free. It's kind of like trusting everything works out. So that's a very solar plexus led thing. And so like for people that are around kids, parents, that sort of thing, when you lead from that place of like just kind of a trust and worry-free energy that like everything's gonna work out, that creates this kind of aura, this natural environment, like where kids can kind of relax and kind of like feel okay to tune into their natural frequency of like their life's evolution. One of the things that's gonna happen when this stuff starts in February 2027 is there's this idea of rave children being born. So if you've heard of things like, you know, indigo children, rainbow children, that sort of thing, the raves, the idea is that their genetics are gonna be more coded for this like new age that's coming. And so I think the changes and transitions that I think that the world needs, I don't think it's a happens overnight thing. I think that there's more of this like legacy, multi-generational aspect to it. So I think for the adults doing this work and having to do what human design really does ask, which is like decondition the matrix operating systems of being plugged into all this stuff in the world, but also our own personal matrix systems of our habits and our routines, and that unplugging into more of a natural way of living that's more divinely timed that the astrology and human design is asking for, is sort of like laying out a giant red carpet, like for the younger generations to be like, no, it's okay. You don't have to like play bumper cars, you know, with my frequency that, you know, because that can bring up a lot of things, right? Like kids, like they tend to, you know, seek parents' approval, you know, is like a thing that comes to mind, but it's like this more sense of like allowing and trusting intuitively, like what is the communication, what are the boundaries to create and things like that can kind of allow more of this natural flowering essence of kiddos. That does bring me to another point. With this whole sovereign like leadership thing that I'm talking about, if you boil that down into more practical sense, like that's more like creative entrepreneurship like type of stuff. I do think that with the current astrology, and it'll take some time, but also with the whole AI thing, and the whole like systems and things not being like, okay, well, for my external safety and security, I just go work this 9 to 5. At some point, I do think that's going to go away. I really do. So, you know, that's why it's like when I finally stepped away from the construction industry before 2020, and as scary as that was to do this work, I just knew, and my guides, you know, kept saying like, hey, you're being prepared, you know, it's like, because this idea of like way shower, like leadership energy, because it's like, well, I can like, and this is for everyone, but it's like we can be brave, like Aries asked for, and do this now, and kind of like be those like pioneers, because there's such like, this is such rare energy. This is like George Washington and like Ben Franklin, like rewriting like the constitution of how we're living, and just it's all changing. And some of this stuff goes back to like, oh, the last time this astrology happened was the Babylonian time period. You know, it's like it's really, really new, like this new approach. And so we can kind of be on the front end and kind of pioneer that. And just like, and it's a weird example, but when Uranus was in Taurus the last time, that was the build up to like World War II and the Great Depression and things like that. And so most people, it didn't go well. Some people, like, they were able to like have gains from it, essentially. Maybe not ethically, but that brings that up again, is like now we're in this new phase of that transition of Uranus out of Taurus and into Gemini, where it's like there is a way to kind of like be ahead of the curve, but it's not like in the like Hollywood, you know, wealth, look at all my stuff that I have like type of way. It's more of like an energetic vibrational way of being that kind of puts things more towards, I don't want to say the front of the line, but maybe front lines, as opposed to like being the person that like waits to like embody and address and look at this stuff and accept the transition of the old world that we're going away from. Because the longer the wait, the more it like it's becoming the person that feels like the person that like needs the other person's help, so to speak, or isn't like sure what to do. So it's kind of like the testing version of the amusement park. Like, yeah, there might be some things that have to be troubleshooted, but it's kind of like doing it now before it gets like too crowded, is a way that I would put it. So I don't think that it's like the digital space like goes away with all like the tech and the internet stuff. So if it's like a calling for more sovereignty, creative entrepreneurship energy, and you look at the astrology of digital presence, it's probably a good idea to like take whatever the creative idea is that your soul feels like connected to, you feel inspired by, and see how can you establish a digital footprint. And depending on, and not to push it on anyone, but because I don't think the AI part's like going anywhere, like use it as a tool to like expand that consciousness of whatever it is that you're creating. Because like, I don't know how many of you know Gary Vaynerchuk. He goes by Gary V. He's like this like celebrity type entrepreneur that puts out a lot of stuff to people, and he was like, for example, he was like the guy when TikTok came out, he's like, don't shit on TikTok. He's like, I think it's gonna be a thing. And so he's kind of like this intuitive entrepreneur that's very business savvy, but one of his predictions I found interesting that I don't think is wrong is he was like, I think at some point we're gonna be wearing a medical device that just measures all our vitals, and it's just gonna tell us like what it is that we need, like what it is that we need to eat, or what, you know, just like something to like balance out our biology. And that could be a little creepy, but he's like, I think people are gonna love it. But the point he was driving home was that if you automate that process and say that thing says, oh, you need to like do this or whatever, what's gonna decide who it buys it from? You know, because there's a manual interface to go shop around and pick who you're gonna buy whatever from. And so the whole theory was the person that pioneers and kind of gets more plugged into the digital space and the AI space is gonna kind of get that sort of digital real estate. So that's maybe going off the rails a little bit here for today, but the point being is that I feel like there's this like weird mix of like the wild, wild west of possibilities, like where Pluto Aquarius brings up equality, where like anyone can be powerful and, you know, find a way to be their own hero. And same thing with Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, and how these planets, like from the human design perspective, just to clarify, like what really creates that rise of the sleeping phoenix is planets moving into certain gates in human design, because that's part of the derivative of human design. That once that sequence is like fully initiated is when that rise of the sleeping phoenix starts. But that Saturn, Neptune, and Aries also brings up that same thing of just kind of like being your own hero in a way. And so, you know, I think this kind of is the map. If there was a map, it's almost like the map that says there is no map. It's like kind of a weird thing, but it's everything we've been being prepared for. You know, how to practice self-authorship, not give energy or identification away to an outside authority, be more intuitive, pay attention to where we're vibing at our frequency. Yesterday, I mean, I saw this like firsthand. Normally, like with these fairs, Friday, that first day, it's like afternoon, evening. So when I come to these, it's kind of like, you know, maybe get a few readings, whatever. It's usually pretty slow. But I was pretty busy yesterday, and it was because as I was driving in from St. Louis, where I was from, I spent a lot of that drive just like really grounding my energy, tuning into my frequency, you know, listen to a couple guided meditations, listen to some masculine shamanic music, you know, just anything that like felt intuitively, like acoustically aligned to like what it is that I wanted to do, and not from a place of trying to feel a certain way or escapism or anything, but more so just like what intuitively in that moment felt aligned. And so what I felt was that I was in this very natural, carefree attitude, very grounded. My energy was very open, you know, sociable. I was like talking to more of the vendors. Usually I would just like come in and just like, I'm here to fucking work, I'm a Capricorn, you know. And so it was different, and I had several readings, you know, because of it. So that's just an example of a small sample size, and we start magnetizing different experiences and different opportunities when we just trust the action to take of that next intuitive action, because that's a lot of what this is too. It's like, if there's no planning or no mapping, that means if you get the intuitive hit, now, it's now, because like, it's not the, oh, we put it on the list, I'll get to that later. Doesn't work, loses its magic. So, what time is it? Can someone share the time with me? Oh, thank you. I like it. What is time?
What is it?
See if there's anything else. I mean, I'm personally, some things that I'm excited about, like with, you know, other openings that happen of like certain systems that aren't working. Like one of the ones I definitely don't think has been working is the education system. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see about what can come next. I've gotten a lot of visions and awarenesses on possibilities for just, different ways of education that can more honor like kids and where they're at. I want to say that, it's from now until February 2027, like 2025, 2026, we're always going to be the years that it's like, oh, you thought 2020 was the thing? It's like, just wait until 2025, 2026, where it's like, this is the real thing. But then once we get there, February 2027 becomes kind of like the new normal, and it kind of becomes every day is more of an acceptance, like, no, we're not going back to 2018, 2019, like that way of living that, because it's easy to cling on to, right? If you think about 413 years of the same cycle, and we're in the last like roughly year and a half of it, it's like, of course, it's like, well, we're about to go off the edge of a cliff and we can feel it in a weird way, and it's a surrender and a free fall and a trust into it. And that's why you'll see people too being like, oh, it's end times, it's Book of Revelations, it's all this stuff. It's just the end of an era, it's just a shifting of cycles. And it's deeply energetic, but there will be a physical component to it too. But that new normal comes in, and then maybe it's a few years, of like, okay, how do we adjust to this? I mean, I think there is a remarkability of Chiron coming into Taurus, and just because that deals so much with humanity's state of suffering and healing and that. But I think by 2030, 2032, like things can start to settle down a little bit, where we can kind of start to find a rhythm. Now, human design wise, I mean, the intense fluctuations of how humanity is evolving in terms of their consciousness, to be honest, that really doesn't actually slow down until 2050. So it's not like, we're getting off kind of the fate train of evolution like anytime soon, and this is always the hard part, and it is kind of a Chiron Aries thing. It's like the acceptance, the raw acceptance of, it is special to be, I think, incarnated, to be a soul in a human body during this time. I think that there's something really special about that, like these changing of ages and so many things changing at once. I mean, even if you just like look at like, I stopped trying to even like pay attention to any like I didn't watch news, but like obviously more evolved sources, of information of like, what's going on. It's like you can't even like keep up with it anymore. It's like it's something new every day, every hour. It seems like a lot of weeks. And I think that everyone can kind of like choose their battles, pick your poison maybe. Like my guides for a long time were like, and part of this is very specific to me too, but they're kind of like, hey, it's like a train wreck. It's hard to look away. So it's like all this stuff going on out here. It's kind of like, it's hard to look away, but when you do it, it's just like being careful about the distraction element, because they were showing me it's like, it's not just like seconds of your life, or, oh, I just saw that one thing real quick. Like, we're always like changing channels like in our frequency, right? And so if changing channels in our frequency is maybe an involuntary decision for most, which is really just what are you putting your attention and energy on, if that moment by moment subtle decision is creating the timeline that we're on, maybe getting hijacked even for just 15 seconds of that thing could be, detrimental. Like when I did the channeling with the Charlie Kirk thing, they were just like, hey, it's a psyop, and it's just another divide conquer thing, and that the more people give their attention to it, the more it's kind of like taking away from the beauty of the current astrology of what we can be doing and creating. And again, that can be sort of like nuance with the understanding that there is stuff happening in the world and challenges and people going through stuff, but it's not to desensitize, but it's like the part of that's like kind of like always going on, but of course it's going to feel more intense with these changing of ages like this, and that we're just better off. I guess you could kind of call it putting on your own oxygen mask, but we're past that at this point. It's more just like showing people how to breathe and how to create, how to do life like differently, and just like that inspired piece, because we can't like get pulled down by it, because it's frequency, you know. It's like the frequency part is kind of demonstrated by that whole saying, like, you're the average of the people that you spend the most time around, you know, it's like 5 people. So, and I don't think it's like, stay away from me, you know, I don't want to feel that bad vibes or whatever. Again, I think it's more this intuitive way of leading and living. So, yeah, I think now is a good time for any Q&A that anyone has. And there's no questions off the table. It could be personal, it could be collective, just if there's anything that comes to mind, any clarifications, that sort of thing. Yes?
What is your human design type?
I am a manifesting generator 4/6. And so, how many of you are like totally new to human design? Okay, cool. So human design's like this sister modality that came out in the 90s, and it kind of like blended different elements of things that already existed, like astrology, the I Ching, and things like that. And so basically what it distilled was like this idea that the mind is kind of just the separate thing from everything else, but that the body has its own unique way of operating, and that human design helps define certain ways of how our intuition uniquely operates, that connects not just like from, wait, was that intuition? Was that an angel? Or was that just my voice in my head? But like an actual more reliable source that's in the body, that's connected to the spirit, that you can rely on. And that it brings up this concept of like strategy and authority, where it's like, okay, a couple of types in the human design is manifesting generator and generators. That's 70% of the population right there. And so like my strategy, for example, is to respond, and my authority is my sacral. So what that means is like, if you're like, hey Eric, do you want to have a beer? I would tap into my sacral, and if I were a generator, it would specifically need to be this more acoustic sacral response, like or like very just kind of like As a manifesting generator, I could just like say yes or no. It's a little bit different. So there's a whole, you know, just like astrology, right? There's so many rabbit holes and teachings to go down. Same thing with human design, but just because she asked the question, you can find out what your human design type is. You could literally just Google human design chart. You put in your information, including your birth time, just like you would astrology, and then you could see what that spits out, and then you could just go to Google or ChatGPT or whatever and just like look it up and be like, what does it mean to be a manifesting generator? What does it mean that I'm a 4/6? And you can kind of just learn that. If you did just that part alone of knowing what your type is and what your strategy authority is, even just that, like, can in theory lead you to fruition. Like, you don't need to like know everything, like all your astrology or all the maps or all the bells and whistles, because we kind of reached a place of almost like information overload. There's so much data, this age of information, but then there has to be like an efficient way of applying it now for this new age that we're going into. And so even as someone who was always an astrologer first, you know, human design came after, you know, it really does like simplify things. Now, what is the combative like to that, where it's like, oh, simple, I just follow my sacral, blah, blah, blah. Well, the ego, the mind, my conditioning. Okay, thank you. You know, like some of my conditioning was like, I have to prove myself to be worthy. I have to prove myself to be worthy of love. I have to, you know, there's so many forms of conditioning, right? Like with these programs that get imprinted, it becomes a part of like the false ego. And so I was even noticing like where I would go to tap into my sacral and I would hear this voice be like, no, we're not gonna get what we want if we do that. Because it's kind of like, you know, the ego and mind wants control. So it's like that, there is a shadow self to this. It is that kind of like, you know, whether you want to call it negative ego or You could call it like sub-personas, like for those that are familiar with IFS, internal family systems, which by the way, for anyone that's like wanting like any therapy work, I'm just saying like there's a really, the IFS model is awesome. Like, so if you ever wanna like go research a therapist, that does like IFS work, internal family systems, amazing modality, because it gives a voice to those sub-personas that are trying to fight for different things instead of pathologizing. And so, you know, what is usually that Geneva Convention of conflict of, oh man, I really want to watch that next episode on Netflix. I'm like, oh fuck, I really should go to bed. I got work tomorrow. That's just, you know, kind of a prime example of being able to listen to these different parts, what it is that they're, you know, wanting. And so there are tools that we can use to very gently decondition, you know, these programs and these sub-personas without like trying to wake up overnight and follow our human design type and this, you know, sovereignty of this strategy and authority. And the nice thing is with the deconditioning, and I've never thought about this way before, but this is actually really beautiful. It's like, sometimes it's like, well, I just want to get there, right? I just want to be empowered and be in my strategy, my authority, my human design, the satisfaction that brings the success, whatever. But we learn a lot about ourselves too, through the deconditioning actually. You know, like through the unraveling, that spiral energy, you know, it's like the contrast, like learning what you're not in order to understand what you are, right? Like contrast, you know, really does rule this reality, like masculine, femininity, like that sort of thing. So, thank you for that question.
I have lots more questions.
Yeah.
I don't want to take anybody else.
No, I mean, if no one else has one right now, go for it.
Well, I just have one. So I've noticed over, say, the last 6 months that I don't even know where the thought came from, but I've been speaking to people around me about the freedom of personal choice.
Mm-hmm.
You get to make the choices for yourself, and that's complete freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And then on part of that, I've been speaking about, you know, people, well, what should I do? Which path brings you joy?
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, which path brings you joy? And those just came upon me about the last 6 months or so. Is that part of this transitional change that we're talking about?
1,000%, yeah, because if you think about it, if we're ending this whole illusionary paradigm of like what achievement or, you know, being famous or purpose like even looks like, and we're distilling it down more into the present moment of things, like purpose really is, I think, found in the present moment. And so if we're talking about like frequency, right, and like elevated states that inspire people and like sovereign choice, like yeah, like pick the thing that brings you joy, because not only is that gonna be giving a beautiful meaning to life and why you do what you do, but it's also contagious to others too. And so, you know, the following the strategy and authority of human design, it may not always lead directly to like those elevated states. Like sometimes maybe it needs to lead us to something that we have to like alchemize, transmute, turn lead into gold to get to that joy, right? Like, cause like, you know, someone can be like, ignore a challenge in life and be like, oh fuck, I don't want to deal with that thing. It doesn't bring me joy. But like maybe that's the elephant in the room, that the strategy of authority is saying like, hey, face that thing, and like then you can get your recess. Then you can get like the joy. So I think that's absolutely right. And I think that there's also going to be, because it's weird, because like the mind is always like looking for that exact like philosophy too, you know, of like, oh, just like do this thing and then it becomes this thing, and it works to a point. But then I think that there's also paying attention to, you know, do things like continue to be sustainable and stay in that like expanded like state of joy, if that makes sense. But I love that point, because it's a great like indicator of like a direction to move. And at the same time, like there might be times like where if you follow strategy and authority, it may not look like that, like at least immediately. if that makes sense. Like it might be cloaked, you know, because like even if you broke it down on the level of like people, like sometimes you ask someone like, hey, why don't you just do what brings you joy? And they're like, I don't know what brings me joy. Like it's probably cloaked in some conditioning. And so it's like, well, maybe you need to like go face that wound with like mom and dad or something. And like, maybe that's what the strategy authority is like going to, is like some of that in order to uncover like, what was the innocence of your inner child that's connected to the higher self that brings you joy. So, but yeah, I think how do I put this? No one's right or wrong, but I'm like, we're both right? I don't know. But no, it's excellent, it really is. Yeah, I think that's a super sound, like, way to approach this. And I saw like a lot of sage wisdom come out when you shared that, so that was dope. It was cool to witness, yeah. Anyone else?
Okay, so, I have a few questions, but one is, the first one's simple. When you talk about the rave children and having more genetic codes come online, do you mean, I just wanna know more what that means. Does it mean like having more chakras available? Does it mean having what we consider, or scientists call junk DNA, that's more online and available, being more intuitive, telepathic, like what does that mean?
Yeah, I think a little of that is all true, and it just really depends on the uniqueness of the individual, because what I mean by the genetics being different is that it's like creation is like intelligent, and so it knows that to have children being born that are born with an old operating system for a reality that doesn't exist anymore after 2027 wouldn't make sense. So it's more so just like they're gonna be more natural to choosing sovereignty, personal choice, like self-leadership, that sort of thing, and that they're not going to be raised, their natural operating system, if they were allowed to just evolve without too much environmental tampering of like imprints, they would evolve to be like very, you kind of call it free-spirited would be a way, because their consciousness of that soul is not expecting to be gridded into like a certain operating system or network that's not really there like anymore. So like when they grow up, I wouldn't be surprised if like some of them are in their 20s and you think that they're like an 80-year-old ascended master or something, just because like they didn't have to go through all like the karma and conditioning and stuff, because there's theories of that too, of like they're not gonna have the same karma to deal with, they're not gonna have the same, fluff stuff to deal with. So as far as like access to like higher level chakras or intuition, or I think maybe telepathy or something is what the other one that you said, I think those pieces are just gonna depend on the uniqueness of the individual. Like that it's just like nature, like somehow it all just kind of like fits together. And I think in general that will be the thing too, like if everyone was in theory, and it's very, okay, thank you. It's like a thing where if we follow our strategy authority human design, we deconditioning theory, if everyone were doing that, everyone would kind of find their natural role and rhythm. That's not like a sign, like you do this job because you need this money or whatever. Like you would be liberated in doing what it is that you're here to do. So, cool. Okay, we gotta wrap up here. So thank you everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you. If anyone wants to leave their email address to get on the newsletter, and just when I send out like free like weekly horoscopes or like updates that I do, that's kind of talking about the same stuff, basically just like preparing for 2027, and just kind of this like horoscopes that are just not your like cookie cutter variety, not the newspaper fluff. If you are interested in that, want to stay up to date, feel free to come up here and leave your email. If not, that's okay too, and I just appreciate everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.